Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. You'll wait just for a minute before we get started. So we are seeing participants coming in. All right, I think we can get started. This is an 1-hour session, and it could be we have quite a few things to cover. Hopefully, it'll be engaging for everyone who's here. This is the first of our INASP webinars that is derived from the book that we recently published. We'll talk a little more about that book. So this session is beyond content delivery, how to make online learning truly participatory. My name is Ravi Murugesan. I am an INASP associate. I'll be moderating this webinar, and we have an INASP presenter, some panelists. I'll introduce them very soon. So first, I'll go through a few slides and hand over to Joanna. If you're not muted already, please stay muted while others are speaking. We are recording this webinar. So by being here, you consent to being recorded. If you have any technical issues during this webinar, you can write to my colleague, Caitlin, cbaker@inasp.info, or you can post on the chat. So the agenda for today is setting the scene, and then Joanna will present INASP's findings in making online learning participatory based on the book that we have recently published. That will be followed by a panel discussion with 3 of our panelists who are here. At the end, there'll be we'll have some room for question and answer. Let's see. So let me introduce our panelists to you. We have here with us Professor Diana Lorillard from University College London in the UK, Dr. Zainab Yunusa Kaltungo from Federal Teaching Hospital in Gombe, Nigeria, and Dr. Farooq Rathore from the Armed Forces Institute of Rehabilitation Medicine in Pakistan. Now, maybe I'd like to ask the panelists to say a few words about them. So starting with Diana.
Well, hello, and thank you very much for this kind invitation. I'm looking forward to hearing this discussion very much. It's a very important book that you've been able to produce. I welcome that. And it's been a great pleasure to be involved with Joanna in working on the project that she had with INASP, working with you all. And part of that process was looking at the Learning Designer tool that we created for teachers, and that was something which I've been involved in for some years now. So being able to work through to the fully practical implications of that was fascinating. So thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Zainab?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity, INASP, and thank you, our participants. As I say every time, my work with Author Aid is like a gift that keeps giving. I'm the coordinator for the online Author Aid Biomedicine and Healthcare Journal Club, and I've also facilitated online massive open online courses since 2016, and I'm really glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Zainab. Farooq?
Hello, everyone, and assalamu alaikum. My name is Farooq Rathore. My background is rehabilitation medicine and pain medicine. So basically, my journey with Author Aid started back in 2008 as a mentee. I was a student looking for guidance. Author Aid helped me a lot, and it has been a fantastic journey. And throughout the years, then I got involved in different Author Aid projects like online facilitation. I became a mentor myself, and right now I'm an Author Aid steward. And I look forward to share my own experience of working in Pakistan and delivering this online content and learning from all of my colleagues and my fellow panelists. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Farooq. So let me say a little bit about INASP, the organization. You heard a bit, Author8, Zainab and Farooq mentioned Author8. Author8 is a project coordinated by INASP. INASP, we are a nonprofit based in the UK. We've been around for about 30 years, and our vision is to put research and knowledge at the heart of development. And our mission that we work on every day is supporting individuals and institutions to produce, share, and use research and knowledge to transform lives. So we, about 10 years back, right, more than 10 years back, we got started with digital learning or technology enhanced learning. And even before that, we had started setting up online systems for Southern journals. And in 2011, we ran our first online course in research writing, and then we moved into other online courses such as training librarians on copyright and licensing, journal editors as well. And initially, it was small courses, but the demand really grew in just a few years, and we started offering massive open online courses while branching out to do specialist courses for smaller audiences, self-study tutorials, e-mentoring opportunities, and in the past few years, online journal clubs as well. And around the time the COVID pandemic started, we already had a fair bit of experience, so that helped us go, do even more. And we decided to conduct a meta-analysis of the data that we collected over nearly a 10-year period, and we've shared the findings and lessons in our book. That's how the book came into being. Now I will hand over to my colleague Joanna.
Everyone, my name is Joanna Ward. I'm from INASP, and at INASP I lead on technology enhanced learning. It's a pleasure to be able to present the findings of the book today to you. As already mentioned, the book was published with African Minds. It's an open access publisher, so you can download a digital copy of the book by scanning the QR code here. We will keep that slide at the end of the session as well, so don't worry if you don't manage to do it now. There is a, Ravi, can you put next slide, please? There is a whole chapter on methodology in the book, so I won't spend much time going through it. Generally, we have conducted a synthesis of data on our technology enhanced learning initiatives, data collected between 2011 to 2020. We commissioned an external research consultant to do this analysis for us. And the types of data that we included are learning analytics and participant feedback data. We analyzed data from more than 20 different online and blended activities or courses, many of which we ran on multiple occasions. And then data were combined across courses to ensure robustness. Then we included qualitative data from semi-structured interviews with INASP partners. We interviewed around 20 of INASP partners about the experience of technology-enhanced learning and the impacts of these initiatives on them. And that was in the period 2015 to 2020. We also included secondary literature produced at INASP throughout the years. So doing our projects and having a lot of mail activities, we've been able to publish 30 different reports, and we in addition included a lot of internal reports and evaluation documentation. Finally, we also reviewed academic literature, which considers technology-enhanced learning either exclusively or partially within the context of the Global South. We included a total of 30 books or articles in our synthesis, and these formed a backdrop against which to interpret our data. So part 2 of the book is a robust summary of current literature in the field. Here, I'm just going to focus on the main highlights. So there's been a dramatic expansion in technology-enhanced learning since 2010. there has been a body of literature, a large body of literature that is concentrated on MOOCs. There is much less written up about other approaches. Large body of there is also discussion that focuses on key dimensions and presents online learning as a negative alternative to blended or face-to-face learning. And issues pointed out here include a lack of accessibility for women, for people living in rural areas, and also for those who have lower level of educational attainment. There are poor completion rates overall, pressures of time, whether learning is synchronous or asynchronous, and a lack of interaction with peers and trainers. Next slide, please. So we were able to identify 6 common assumptions prevalent in the academic literature around technology-enhanced learning in the Global South. First, that technology-enhanced learning is associated with a lower level of equity in participation and outcomes compared with face-to-face learning. The second assumption is that technical and technological barriers to online participation are widespread and reduce the efficacy of learning. Third assumption is that combining online and face-to-face approaches is more beneficial than training conducted exclusively online. The fourth, that online learning doesn't support participants' interaction well, and that has negative impact on learning outcomes. The fifth, that the use of one-size-fits-all approach to designing technology-enhanced learning activities is inherently problematic as it doesn't take account of the context. And finally, that timetabling online learning is challenging, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. What we did, we then tested these assumptions against INASP evidence, and part 2 of the book is dedicated to presenting the results of this exercise step by step, so assumption by assumption. What we're doing today in this webinar is focusing in particular on assumption 4, which means that TEL does not support participants' interaction well, which has negative impact on learning outcomes. Before I delve deeper into what we have found about interaction in our courses, let me briefly name the approaches we used to make learning more social and create community of learners rather than kind of isolated experience on our courses. So we use facilitated forums to initiate and seed discussions on topics that are good material for a debate and exchanging ideas. We use peer assessments to develop kind of assessment rubrics on topics that form a good basis for that. And we guide learners how to prepare their own work and assess the work of others. We organize study groups and assign mentors to support these. We organize as well live drop-in clinics for questions and answers that people might have, and also to keep the presence and the connection going on the course. We also invite external speakers to the live sessions, and yeah, that's basically it. So there are both kind of asynchronous and synchronous opportunities to stay connected on our courses. So coming to the results of the study now, in general, Ravi, can you put on the next slide? Thank you. In general, our learners have found studying online to be a positive experience in its own right, and they very often single out interaction with facilitators and peers as a success factor on our courses. The vast majority of our MOOC participants feel that we offer the right levels of moderation and facilitation that allows them to complete the course successfully. And this is evident through our high completion rates, because for this type of a course, they reach 45 to 50%. Many participants appreciate access to facilitators and peers, both in the discussion forums and live drop-in clinics. It seems, though, that since the COVID pandemic, this appetite has grown towards live session, and there is slightly less appetite for synchronous communication. Perhaps that's due to an accumulation of factors, maybe better connectivity in some regions, changing habits of how we work and learn, and proliferation of new tools. And we're hoping to be able to discuss it in more detail today. In our smaller courses, participants are singled out mentoring groups, and mentor support is one of the success factors. We have also found that peer assessment is highly appreciated, and that is both in terms of feedback that people receive and in terms of actually the benefit of giving somebody a critique themselves and kind of consolidating your own learning. Similarly, in our more intensely facilitated courses, participants highly appreciated personalized feedback offered on final assignments, and 95% rated this feedback, this personalized way in which a facilitator is coming back to them as very useful. Generally, participants on our courses appreciate the opportunity to collaborate with peers and facilitators from a wide range of countries. After one of our MOOCs on research writing, 16% of participants continued collaboration after the MOOC has finished, which is quite a considerable number, given the thousands of people who took the MOOC. Having said that, there are also times when limiting the cohort size is better. And for example, in our licensing and negotiation course for librarians, the participants felt safer sharing hints and tips on how to get best deals with the publishers. So it was better for them to be in a closed space rather than a wider group. So it has to be taken basis by basis. Coming on to our self-study tutorials, even when online activities involved no interaction whatsoever, only small minority identified this as a problem. However, when a tutorial was offered with a light touch moderation, dropouts reduced by half. And that's probably the most significant result of our study. In 2021, we launched our critical thinking course, both as a self-study tutorial and in a moderated version. Ravi, next slide, please. Thank you. And moderation involved sending weekly announcements, answering some technical questions, and encouraging participants to post their thoughts on the discussion forum. It was really light touch moderation. It obviously had the clear starting and ending dates for the course. And then we compared feedback data for those two courses, and participants in a slightly moderated version of the course reported slightly more positive outcomes than those who completed the self-study, but the difference was not statistically significant. It was a very small difference. However, what was most interesting is that those who began the facilitated course were almost twice as likely to complete it than those on a self-study tutorial. So definitely there is some evidence that the presence of interaction may secure higher completion rates, perhaps by motivating participants to or sustaining the interest in some way. Next slide, Ravi, please. So what are the contributing factors to those findings according to us? So for our MOOCs, we draw on from a global community to recruit guest facilitators on the course, and this model has been hugely successful. in ensuring good interaction rates on the discussion forums. So we have a big pool of guest facilitators who come in and help facilitate the course and people's interaction on it. We encourage group work and in each of our courses, and each of our courses has some kind of authentic assessment and a rubric to facilitate peer review. Our courses are mostly asynchronous for flexibility and inclusion and practicality with the time zones, but we also organize lab sessions to create a feeling of presence among the learners and facilitators. We usually have 1 to 2 drop-in clinics per week where we discuss the contents and people can just ask questions. It's very often on optional basis. You can drop in or you don't come up. Or we invite external speakers as well, and we organize group works in breakout rooms. So this additionally encourages new connections to be made. We mostly use tools that learners are comfortable with and already familiar with. So for example, we prefer to use Zoom for live sessions than Microsoft Teams because Zoom is just much more widespread in the global south. We try not to add more than one new or less familiar tool in a course because we are keen to introduce some new ways of doing things and new ways of collaborating, but we also do not want to prioritize technology over learning. And we think that introducing just one tool doesn't put this strain on the participants. Finally, in our self-study tutorials, we are building the facilitator voice, as we call it, into the content by developing in the first person some reflecting commentaries and examples of solutions. So there is this kind of facilitator voice in those tutorials that make you feel like you are not alone on this journey. So that's all from me and all about the kind of findings from the book around interaction.
Right. Thank you so much, Joanna. If you have any questions for Joanna, please post them on the chat. We'll see how many questions we can take later. For now, let's move to the next phase of this session, which is a panel discussion. We have our panelists here, Diana, Zainab, and Farouk. We have prepared a couple of questions for them, which I will speak out, and I'll also post it on the chat, and we'll ask our panelists about their views. The first question is, a lot has happened in the last 2 to 3 years. The COVID pandemic, expansion of learning outcomes, and expansion of learning platforms and communication tools, greater use of smartphones, apps to connect, and so on. In your opinion, how have all these changes had an impact on learners' expectations of online interaction, and what might the implications be for learning design of online courses? Maybe to begin with, it would be nice to hear from Diana. So about 2 to 3 minutes, if you could,
Yes, I'll keep an eye on the time. Thank you. Well, I think in a way, we've already heard from Joanna some answers to these questions, because what your book is going to do is to illuminate exactly what the experiences of students are, because you have empirical work on this. So that's going to help us a lot. But I think the obvious changes that happened was with that tremendous trauma of the pandemic was added the tremendous trauma for teachers and students all over the world to have to suddenly turn on a sixpence to discover a new way of doing teaching and learning. And one of the things that I think a lot of people noticed for the first time was the value of online learning for both flexibility for all parties concerned and inclusivity. And that very flexibility means that far more people are able to engage than was possible before due to distance or time scheduling, all kinds of reasons. And then there was also the discovery that although people tend to say that online interaction is not as good as face-to-face, and of course, on a human level, they are very, very different. but there is a surprising degree of interactivity as possible. And I was noticing on a lot of Joanna's slides, there were some lovely pictures of people sitting in a lecture hall, clearly enjoying a lecture a lot, but they were not interacting with each other. With the technology, they could have been interacting with each other on chat or something, which I hope we will begin to do during the webinar. So it is possible for the technology to actually enhance and improve what's possible. So understanding the balance and the relative value of both face-to-face and technology and how we best blend the two together is extremely important. So that's one of the implications I think we have for learning design, is we have to learn how to do that. Secondly, although people plunged into using online technology, the students were unprepared and anxious in many cases. And for them, the business of having to engage with a lecture and with other members of the audience in an online process like this was very traumatic. It was very difficult. A lot of people just kept their screens blank and they didn't really engage in chat and discussion and so on. So I think one of the things we learned from that is that we have to scaffold that process of being able to understand the student's point of view there, to take care of their well-being. And there's a phrase which is beginning to be used now around this called the pedagogy of care. And that's a pedagogy that understands the emotional context for students in both cases. Now, it's no good, I think, saying that it's only online interaction which is difficult. Face-to-face interaction is difficult. The number of students who are prepared to put their hand up and ask a question in the lecture is very few. And the opportunities for that is very limited because of the time. So face-to-face has its problems too, and we have to understand equally the well-being of students in those contexts as well. So this was one quick example of this, is the way in which in my university, for example, students with disabilities have been lobbying for a long time to make lecture capture available to everybody. Now, with the advent of the pandemic, of course, that was accelerated. Everybody got lecture capture straight away. But that is one illustration of ways in which, had we taken that pedagogy of care more seriously for our disabled students, introduced lecture capture earlier, that would have been good for everybody. And so often that is the case, that when you try to include people more and you orient towards the people who are most disadvantaged and use the technology to help them, that improvement will help everybody. So I think one of the messages in the book that you've just released is how important it is to remember that technology to enhance learning must be learner-led, and we look to our students to help us with that. So when I come back to how do we deal with this, then what is the implication of all this? And for me, the implication is the importance of teachers exploring, innovating, and sharing together, not making the assumption that we know how to do this. We've got an enormous amount to learn. So the work that I did with Joanna on looking at how we could use the learning design tool in the context of enabling teachers to experiment and then share their ideas. Some of that, I think, is represented in the book. And that's what I look forward to the teaching community being able to do through this sort of process, which is to be able to innovate and share and build on each other's work, not be alone in that process, but to share their ideas and to use all the tools we can to do that.
Thank you, Diana. Zainab, do you have any thoughts on how these, the changes in the past 3 years of change have had an impact on learners' expectations of interaction?
Yeah, sure. I have a few. A lot of them have been mentioned by Joanna. And one thing I would like us to know is that apart from learning, almost everything else is fighting for our attention. And we all know how digital distractions have become a really big problem. And I was mentioning to Joanna also before we opened up the floor, I think it's that thing called FOMO is real. We want everything, but we have just 24 hours. So in fighting for learners' attention, we must be careful to note that when we're designing anything, students will often ask on what platform. And as Joanna also mentioned, and also in the book, we want something that everybody's familiar with. So Zoom, of course, comes tops in a lot of things. And they also want to know, would I have access to the recording? Because we know that, especially in the developing world, a lot of us have full-time jobs and we also want to learn, and a lot of our work where we work do not make allowances for you to have time for learning. So you're expected to learn. And that means having access to the recording is going to be an added advantage. And for the live ones, for courses, it's also important that you have a platform where the participant doesn't only just read. If they want to listen to the video, they can listen to it on the go. A lot of people now listen to podcasts in their car because of long commutes. And if you have access to that, then you're likely to have increased participation. Then, as rightly noted, those of us in the developing world, we tend to use our mobile devices more, especially because we do not have radio access to Wi-Fi, like in the developed world. And that means platforms that are optimized for mobile devices are likely to find more favor with us. And then, of course, shorter videos because of the bandwidth, the quality of the internet that we have. All these are very important. And I'll give props to INASP/Author Aid for this. All these have been taken care of. So thank you. That's what I'm going to say.
Thanks, Zainab. Farouk, any thoughts?
Thank you very much. So we need to understand that before the COVID-19, this online education was available to very few people around the globe. So mostly it was concentrated either in the high-income countries, and even in developing countries like Pakistan, it was only available in institutions who had a lot of resources. So this was not the default mode. And one fine morning, everyone around the globe, they woke up, and now online learning was the default mode, at least for the next 12 months. So initially there were many hitches and many glitches, and people actually gave some space to the learners as well as to the educators. But if you ask me, expectations have changed over the last 3 years, because both learners and students and educationists, they sort of expect that in the last 3 years, people should have adopted to the new norm. So probably if you ask me, as someone who actually adopted this thing very early back in early 2020, so the first thing that I think that expectation is that, people want now a more interactive course. They just don't want that the person is going to show the slides or the lecture that he or she used to do in a face-to-face environment, and he simply comes and delivers a 1-hour lecture and goes away. No, the most important thing that now people are demanding, whether by a verbal feedback or by online discussion boards, that they want an interactive experience. And if you ask me, it has become very easy to do that kind of interactive experience even in large groups. So we have so much available like Padlet, Google Jamboard, and you don't have to sort of invest a lot of money. So initially, it was my own observation as well. I don't have resources. I can't spend a lot of dollars in buying these kind of resources. But now most of the resources are available either free of cost, and to educators based in the developing world, they are offering prolonged free trials, or even they would actually give you access up to 50, 60 students free of cost. So the implication for the learning design would be that, we have to be very careful that we are not now designing courses for someone who is going to be in front of us, and we can see their body language, we can read their faces, and we can immediately sort of change our strategy. No. Actually, it is very difficult to talk to people in small boxes on a screen. It is challenging for everyone, even in 2023. So first thing is we need to change our strategy of creating courses. We need to ensure there's an element of interaction. It could be a small interaction like a small quiz or a quick feedback or maybe an online poll, or it could be maybe a gamification session using Kahoot. So if you ask me, my favorite is Kahoot. I use Kahoot a lot. And Kahoot not only gives you a real-time feedback, it would actually, if you allow it, it can actually give you the progress of the individual student as well, which means you can monitor the progress and give him or her feedback at the end of the session. So there are a lot of options available. The expectation have risen a lot, and people want the educators to create more interactive and good quality content that is not a replica of the face-to-face session. And they want interaction, they want feedbacks, and they want sort of the use of technology more. So maybe integrating YouTube videos and so many other things that are available online. So these are my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lots of great advice from our panelists. Well, I'm learning new things right during this session. Let's move on to the second question. I've just popped it in the chat window. What are the shorter question? What are the biggest dampeners, or what really, dampens interaction in online learning spaces? And as learning designers or course facilitators, what should we be careful not to do? Maybe we'll take it in a slightly different order. Perhaps Zainab, would you like to answer this one first?
Sure. Thank you. For me, the first one, and Farouk already alluded to that, we should not just load interactive resources online and allow participants to use the anonymity of the virtual space to freely express themselves, I put that in quotes, without some form of moderation. I've attended courses where people posted some not too nice comments and they were there for very long. I remember in one of the MOOCs where somebody posted a really racist comment, and because the comments were being monitored, the posts were being monitored, it was quickly seen, and then it was flagged and it was quickly taken down. So it's so important, because as one course I attended online said, in a world that is becoming increasingly less human, we have to keep asking ourselves, what's the most human I can be in this situation? So how human can we be even when we're behind the anonymity of the virtual space? Also, as learning designers, I think we should not simply copy and paste experiences from the global north and apply them to the global south. And that's one of the reasons why I really like the author aid MOOCs, where there's usually an assessment at the end, and usually by the next one or even two courses, a lot of the learnings have been incorporated into that. Then my last point on this would be, I think it's also nice that when you've attended a course, unlike most online courses, it shouldn't be just goodbye. There should be a forum for you to, if you wish, remain within the circles of that institution. And again, I'm giving top props to INAS and Author Aid for the tea time events, for lifetime access to resources when you've participated in courses, and also a lot of the free resources. So it's like after sales service when you bought a really good product. And as I said earlier, INAS Author Aid are like gifts that keep giving. So again, top props to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Zainab. Maybe Farouk, would you like to say something about this question, dampeners of interaction? What should we not do?
Sure. Yeah. So again, in no particular order, probably if you ask me, I would say, first of all, the attitude of the instructor. So, I mean, again, the same thing, many of us were actually forced to do this online teaching. And it actually showed in our slide and sort of like, the way we taught. And there are people who are so interested, and they are invested so much in online teaching that you can actually see their sort of like their enthusiasm is infectious. It actually oozes out of your screen. So first of all, instructor attitude. Second thing, again, the same thing is a poor course design. So if you're only like going to share whatever you created for a face-to-face audience, and you're going to throw it to an online audience, it's not going to work. And then one thing that is actually a major dampener, at least in my part of the world, is actually the technical issues. So it could have like two faces. On one end, people who are not very much well versed with the technology, and they are forced, or they are doing this online teaching and training sessions, and they don't do it well because they're not very much familiar with the tools, how to take the session along, and how to give a feedback, and how to interact. And the second is something that goes beyond our control. Internet connectivity issues. So even if in a country like Pakistan, we have areas with excellent internet high broadband connectivity, and in the same country, we might have people who actually struggle even to see a lecture video online. So these are some of the dampeners, which might actually reduce the online teaching experience. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Farouk. Diana?
Yes, well, I think a lot of very good points have been made both by Zainab and Farouk there, especially the idea that in the global north, we do things in ways that will not always transfer to the global south. And it's so important for that transfer of ideas to be happening across the global south of the teaching community there. But I think in terms of what we should not do, the first one is exactly what you were both saying about not simply transferring your face-to-face methods to the online context. But secondly, also, don't assume that our students know how to do this. This is a very different way of learning. In all honesty, our students don't really know how to learn well at university when they come anyway. They need our help with that. They need scaffolding, and they always have done. But in the online context as well. So the more we can develop our own improved understanding of the critical differences between the in-person interaction and the online interaction, the better. I thought it was very interesting, some of the data that Joanna presented, where she was saying that when they had one version of the course without moderation, they had a much lower completion rate. It didn't make all that much difference to the students' sense of confidence in what they were learning, but it made a huge difference to that sense of being cared about. You know, does anybody really care what I think here or how I'm reacting to this? And being able to learn from the students as we go, to treat this as essentially a design process where we won't get it right all the time. And that's a message in the book about capacity development. When we're doing capacity development, that development goes both ways. And it will do just as much in the context where we're now trying to learn how to do online learning. We have to learn from our students as well. So experimenting with them, consulting with them about how we could do better on this, all of those things will feed in, and being able to take some of the ideas like the use of Menti or Padlet or polls in the context of online learning, take that into the classroom as well. That will enhance the classroom, and so on. So I think my biggest don'ts are, don't assume we can transfer our existing pedagogic knowledge. Use it, but it won't transfer. And don't assume students know how to do this. The capacity development has to go both ways.
Thank you so much. And for me, you know, certainly a takeaway is pedagogy of care. You know, maybe that's kind of an overarching thing to you know, to ground you know, just delivering or designing and facilitating good online courses, or any teaching, but particularly with online courses, you know, where the immediate feedback is perhaps missing. And there are lots of new tools, some of which Farouk mentioned. So yeah, it's yeah, that's something I'll certainly remember, pedagogy of care. I think we're reached the well, the end of this panel, you know, the panel discussion. There are a couple of questions in the chat. We have time to take them for the next 10 minutes. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat window before we close the webinar. I've seen, I'm gonna take up a question by Hugh. It's for Joanna. And of course, panelists, if you have any thoughts, please feel to chip in. So Hugh says, in face-to-face computer labs, the idea of synchronized typing, where everyone follows on a step-by-step basis what the instructor is typing, is slow, but is a good way for students to learn by doing. This is very difficult in an online basis, and the alternative of having checkpoints for a graduated sequence of small tasks with online support doesn't work very well. Are there better alternatives here? Joanna, do you have any thoughts on this?
No, a tricky one for me, to be honest. Can you repeat it, Ravi?
So yeah, it's actually a somewhat intricate question, I think. Hugh, are you there? Would you like to?
Yeah, I hope that's okay. So my apologies for too many ifs, ands, and buts there. So to explain, in computer labs, one way that, for example, we do things with respect to the carpentries approach is this idea of, okay, I'm going to type something, we have that up on the big screen, and then now you do the same thing. And it's and you have helpers kind of around the labs, and there's kind of going, yeah, you okay? And so everybody kind of moves forward and so on. But I've found that approach really doesn't work if you try and do that even on a live online basis. The other thing is trying to think about that and turn it into something which is more asynchronous, is to have, you know, provide people with a document. I mean, they already have a document with these things, and to sort of say, okay, you've got a series of, turn those into sort of like little checkpoints which are sort of tasks they're supposed to finish off, and you say, oh, okay, if you have a question, it's there on the forum, that, you know, go and ask a question on the forum, or you know, and there's some live interaction there. But that again doesn't really seem to, you know, students tend to step away from that and not engage. You know, that's the sort of scenario that I'm talking about. And sort of, is there a better way to sort of improve that engagement?
I think from my perspective, and I'm going to hand over to other panelists if they have that idea, I think that, you know, we not everything can be replicated or, you know, done differently in an online space, or maybe tools are developing, maybe it will be easier in the future. But, you know, we all know the scenario in which we still want to, for work as well, come together and have this immediate interaction, because some, you know, creative problem-solving workshops are just more immediate in this way. So also at DINASP, we're not advocating for doing everything online purely. We have a strong blended component in our capacity development approaches. So from the top of my head, I can't give you a solution for this particular interaction problem, right? But I think, as Diana also mentioned in her talk, it's all about now us as teachers and as people who do the learning design, innovating with things, finding new tools, sharing how it has actually worked in practice, and whether it's something possible. So we need to really develop ways and use tools like the Learning Designer, where you can actually share those ideas and share it with others for them to try. Any of the panelists have more thoughts about that?
Well, I don't know if this really answers the question here, but we've done something a bit like that in online courses, where the sort of the milestones or the checkpoints are more student groups coming together to do things together and comment on each other's work, that kind of thing. So it's like a kind of mild form of peer review, where they're doing things on their own and then they come together and discuss it. And so there's an online space for them to do that, which I, as teacher, can go in and comment on. And that seemed to get quite a lot of engagement. I mean, if the tasks are interesting enough, I think they'll get engagement there.
Yeah. All right. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a good question. Quite a challenging, you know, transfer this very interactive face-to-face environment into something online. I'm looking at the chat. There are some good comments. Can't see any questions as such.
I can see a question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you're seeing the same thing. So there was a question particularly for Diana. Or maybe it's a comment, actually. We were doing a British Council MOOC on English language teaching, professional development. Then we had weekly face-to-face meets where we got to discuss putting new ideas around teaching into a local context. It worked really well. I'd argue that there was a process of decolonizing the experience too. So yeah, it's not a question, it's a comment mentioned to Diana. So I don't know if Diana would like to address that or...
Well, I did respond to that because I thought it was a very interesting reflection and wanted to know what it was that was different about the fact that it was a MOOC, because you should be able to get that sense of discovering something about your teacher professional development without it being a MOOC context. And in fact, what Monty King responded with was that deliberate reflective process of having the small group come together. Now, that's pretty unusual in a MOOC, actually, for the MOOC to suggest that people do that. If there's people all from the same institution coming into it, then they can arrange that. And that's a really important blended form of way of doing a MOOC, is to embed in each participant's local situation reflection on what they're studying. And of course, that is fantastic, but it's not confined to a MOOC, that kind of method. It's just good pedagogy, I think, in any context.
Oh, there's a question from John. Just now, Diana mentions that interaction can be hard to encourage in physical classrooms, and Joanna mentions blended learning, and that everything is suited to online. Does encouraging and enabling interactions online have an impact on interactions in the physical classroom, or encourage students to collaborate differently when they do? Yeah. So sort of the reverse.
I have a very definite yes answer to that, because I mean, I noticed when I was working with schools once, was when I first saw this so powerfully, is that when students were interacting online, they could be relatively anonymous, or they could be asynchronous in the way that they're responding into a class debate and that sort of thing. And then what the teacher noticed was that in class, those same students, and they were all boys in this particular school, they were much more inclined to take part in class, having done that already online. So the online sort of quieter, you weren't so prominent, you weren't sort of standing up in front of the class and saying things, you were saying something much more quietly, as it were, and people responded to you. And that gave them the confidence and enthusiasm then to take part in in-person class discussions. I thought that was quite an interesting way of the online preparing you better for the reality of the face-to-face.
Thank you, Diana. I think we have time for one more question from Sherry. What tools and techniques are there to build the feeling of a community of learners, apart from emphasizing that the group of learners has a shared goal? Would any of our Joanna?
I can start, and then maybe someone else will join in. So I think one of the key things in communities of learners is trust, and we have to learn how to build this team building and trust building activities also in online space, and not only in face-to-face settings. So some things that we do in terms of team building and trust building is to incorporate some small activities. To give you an example, whenever we have this kind of meetings with generally, even with our kind of project working teams, not only with the learners, like for instance, even using a Padlet wall, which is a kind of a sticky notes board, where we asked everybody to put in suggestions, and that was a session across countries to put ideas of, what should we visit when we go to those places? What are the recommendations of things to visit? And they would just create this board, and then we would have a conversation about it, because it turned out that people were maybe already visiting this place or had another comment. So there was this kind of 10 or 15-minute activity where it took us into a space where we weren't just, on a task, either learning or working, but simply actually, as Zainab also mentioned, being the human behind it. And I think we have to build them on and not always just rush. So that's one thing. And another thing is activities, joint activities, where people not only go towards a goal, but when we go towards a goal, we have to break it down into smaller chunks and activities, and then doing them jointly, and then seeing the benefit for me in it of going towards that joint goal. But what is the benefit of doing this activity for me? So it's a lot of design again coming in terms of successful communities of learners and communities of practice.
Thank you, Joanna.
Another one?
Yeah.
Yes. Is that okay? Well, I thought that was a great example there, Joanna, but what I always like to fall back on for students in this sort of context is peer review as a process, because it's such a valuable pedagogic technique. Just to get, if they're submitting some kind of assignment, then prior to submitting to the teacher for marking, they exchange what their draft essay or whatever it is, project plan or something, with each other, and they each mark each other's, not mark, I don't want to say it's not assessment, it's review and comment on what the other student has done in relation to the rubric set by the teacher. And as you're looking at someone else's, it's just the same in peer reviewing in academic circles. You peer review someone else's paper, it makes you think about your own and how well you've written that sort of thing and how well you've faced up to the demands of the task. And then you go back to your draft. You think about it in a different way. You've also got someone else's comment and their views of what you might do. So what you end up with is a much better draft than you had in the first place, and the teacher gets something much better quality to mark. So that's something where the learners are working together for each other, and you can make those pairs differ so that they sort of work around a whole group. It's a very good way of getting that sense of we're all in this together and bringing students together as a community within a class.
Okay, I got one too. Can I speak?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please.
Also, an example of something Diana just said, I find very useful, especially when you're in a Zoom meeting and you can have breakout rooms, and those breakout rooms, the participants are randomly selected. They didn't know they were going to be assigned to those breakout rooms. Then you find that those who were quiet probably didn't even turn on their videos. When they're in breakout rooms, they can come out, discuss. And I found that sometimes those who were not participating before, when they get to the breakout rooms, especially when they're supposed to present the finding or the result or something at the end of their breakout session to the main group, those who were previously silent are probably those who were going to make the presentation on behalf of the breakout rooms. So that one I find very useful and brings interaction and creates a sense of community.
Thanks, Zainab. Maybe we have Farouk, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, taking the cue from what Zainab said, one important point that we need to understand while in online interaction or in any kind of educational interaction, whether face-to-face is, not everyone is equal. There are always very smart students, bright students who have always their hand in the air, and they always tend to steal the limelight and they tend to steal the show. So even in an online interaction, the instructor needs to be on the guard that he or she has to sort of point out and maybe encourage those one who always have their cameras turned off or who don't respond to questions or who are not very active. So sometimes, even if you are teaching in an online environment, it seems very familiar, like a face-to-face session where someone is very active and some people are in the background. So it's probably the instructor's duty to sort of identify. And if you have tools which can actually allow people to interact anonymously, many a time I have seen that it improves interaction, because not everyone is very comfortable in sort of like raising their hand and standing in front of a class and express themselves. But if you give them an option that you can actually write whatever you want to write, you can express your opinions maybe on a Padlet, on a Jamboard, and no one would know that who said what. So probably that would give those sort of weak students an opportunity to express themselves and be part of the greater learning community.
Thank you so much, Farouk. I think now I think we've taken the questions that came up in the chat, but we'll have another look at the INAS moderators, and later on, once the series of webinars has come to an end, we will write a blog post covering some of the themes. So you can check out the INAS blog. It's blog.inasp.info. You'll get to it. You can subscribe. Here is a book. It is an open access book published by African Minds. Either scan the QR code or Google it. You'll get to it with one click. You can download the whole book. It's a beauty of open access. I believe there's even a hard copy that is available for sale. All right. So with that, we have come to the end of this this session. I hope it was useful, and I've certainly learned something. So thank you all. Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Farouk.